Okay, folks, how are you feeling?
Great.
So, you understand conversational pattern number 1? Yes? You understand conversational pattern number 2? Yes? Now, you realize that when conversational pattern 2 fails, basically a big emotion flares up. It doesn't technically fail, you can still use it, but it requires a little bit more subtlety. What do? You move straight into conversational pattern 3, which automatically works because the very conditions you need are already there. So it's a no-brainer for you. Make sense? So to give you the simplified version of it is 1, regress, 2, reframe the adult, 3, safety loop 1, 4, reframe the child, 5, safety loop 2, 6, reframe the adult again, 7, repeat, 5 to 6. Make sense so far? Right? It's very simple, right? Then we'll come on to 8. Everyone cool so far? 8, forgive others. 9, forgive self. 10, reintegrate. And 11, blitz them just because you can. Now, does that seem a lot simpler now? Now that you've seen it, now you've actually done all the steps in one degree or another? Does that seem a lot simpler now to do? Something you actually do yourself? Yeah?
Yep.
Good. So there's only one question left, isn't there? Any guesses what that is? What's conversational pattern 4? We're not actually going to practice, by the way, we're not actually going to do this because not everyone was going to want to kind of bring an issue like that to the table in this environment. It's not appropriate for everyone. So if you do want to practice this, what I recommend you do is you get together with someone that basically you're going to have to volunteer yourself as a student, as a subject. And then find someone that you feel comfortable with and say, hey, I'd like to do this with you. And then maybe later tonight or tomorrow morning, you can meet up in your hotel room and do it there. You've got all the steps. You've got the steps in your manuals as well. So you can go through it, and if you have any questions, you can always ask me afterwards. But this is not the place that I want to do it, because I don't want to force anyone into doing something they don't want to do. Does that make sense? Right? So we're just basically going to go into pattern number 4, unless there's any questions left on pattern 3. No? Beautiful. You guys are doing great. Oh, here we go. You good with this?
Here's the question. It's this is set up so that if you get a flare-up in pattern 2 and the PCAT or whatever, you go into this. Is it the case that there will be conditions that you want to use regression to treat where there's not necessarily a massive emotional flare-up? Like if somebody wants to stop smoking, or if somebody wants to stop a certain activity, you might need to do a regression.
Well, here's my take on it. Technically speaking, you can treat any problem with any one of the patterns. Seriously, you can. You just have to be really good at teasing the nuances out to make it work, right? So to take the thinking out from that element, I put them in a sequence so that the obvious failure of one triggers the obvious and the easy start of the other, right? So you do a blitz, and people keep coming out, but, like, I hope this will work, but I don't think so, but this, that gives you the instant trigger, it gives you the juice you need to do mind-bending language, which is pattern 2. When you get a flare of emotion, which would be the one thing that might block the mind-bending language, i.e. pattern 2, it doesn't mean you can't do that pattern, you absolutely can, but the simplest route is to divert straight into the regression, which handles that with most eloquence, right? So the reason I've designed it that way is because it becomes a no-brainer. You start at the beginning, and each part of the process leads automatically to the next, and if it doesn't, it leads to a solution. So either way, you win. But you can do whatever you want, right? You're an adult, and if you understand the process, you can make it work for you in any way you want to.
So I guess, is the answer there then just go ahead and use pattern 2 for the most part, unless you have an emotional flare-up, since it's cleaner and easier?
Exactly, that's my starting point. My starting point is I want to use the pattern 2, unless I'm in a kind of more conversational setting, in which case I'll use pattern 1, and then maybe jump into pattern 2 if I need to. But my favorite is pattern 2. I love it because it's elegant, it's eloquent, it's elegant, it can be smooth, it can be a lot of fun, right? So I like it. And it's also the bit which I think is the most challenging because it requires you to hit that stage where you're right here on the edge with them. And I kind of like being there. Maybe, I don't know, I'm just trance junkie or something, I don't know. So thank you for the question. So now we come to the final stage, which is the reintegration. Remember, we're going to resource, regress. We've done those two, and I think we've covered them pretty fully. Reintegration is a no-brainer. Why? Because basically, it's the cleanup technique. If you've done everything else really well, and something comes back. Here's an example. May I use you for this, Lenny? So Lenny had basically feelings of being faint and maybe a tension in the stomach when she saw someone being hurt, particularly if there's an open wound or blood, right? But now you're kind of fine with the idea. Now, let's say that Lenny was working in an environment where she might have to clean up something like that, and she goes, this is really tedious, I don't really like this. Her unconscious might say, well, when I used to faint, I didn't have to do this job, right? So her unconscious might go, and this, we won't do it, by the way, because it's much better being this way, isn't it? So just you can forget the other stuff. So her unconscious might turn and say, okay, life was sweeter with the faintness, so we're going to bring it back. That way I don't have to go cleaning, scrubbing the floors or whatever the problem, the secondary gain is. So you can tell that because she'll be glowing as she did in the session. You'll test it and it's fine. She goes home 1 week later, she says, it didn't work. That's how you tell, basically, right? If she leaves and it didn't work, it's a very different story than if she spends a week and suddenly comes back after a period of time. Does that make sense? That's the trigger that tells you, or that's the cue that tells you, okay, we may need to do pattern number 4. Make sense?
Which is the trigger? If it's a week before she goes back and it fails, that's the trigger?
Basically, if it's worked for a period of time, but then starts failing, that's the point that lets you know. If it doesn't work at all, the minute she goes out, it happens. It just happens to be that it takes 2 or 3 days before she has to witness an accident of some sort. Then that's not waiting. That's just because no trigger was present, right? So then you may just want to redo the work. You may have missed a piece in the process. But if it actually did work, and she's been fine with normal people, and then having a wound or something, or thinking about it, or not that you're going to be obsessing about it anyway, because that'd be kind of unusual. But then suddenly, a week or 2 in, it starts coming back. That's a great sign that there's an unspoken need, unmet need, a secondary gain, right? So what do you do about that? Any ideas? That's right. Did someone say you reintegrate? I agree.